I was sobbing into my hands on South Beach at sunset, surrounded by hundreds of people taking selfies and sipping cocktails, when he appeared beside me with a cup of coffee I didn't ask for. I didn't even see him coming one moment. I was completely alone in my misery despite the crowd, and the next there was a paper cup sitting in the sand next to my towel and footprints leading away from me toward the water. When I looked up through my tears, I saw him about 20 feet away, a tall man in his 40s walking slowly along the shoreline with his hands in his pockets. He didn't look back at me, didn't wait for thanks or acknowledgement, just continued his solitary walk like he was giving me space to fall apart in peace. Something about that simple act of kindness, the coffee, the distance, the way he'd somehow known exactly what I needed without asking made me cry even harder. I'd come to Miami to escape the wreckage of my life in Chicago, where 3 days ago I'd discovered my fiancé of 2 years in our bed with my maid of honor. The wedding was supposed to be in 6 weeks. The dress was hanging in my closet, the deposits were paid, the invitations had been sent. And now I was sitting on a beach 2,000 miles from home, drinking coffee from a stranger and wondering how I'd gotten everything so spectacularly wrong. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow. When I finally stopped crying long enough to take a sip of the coffee, I noticed something crinkled against the bottom of the cup, a small piece of paper, folded carefully and tucked inside like a message in a bottle. My hands shook as I unfolded it, revealing handwriting that was precise and careful. If you're someone who also knows what it's like to have your life fall apart in front of everyone, I'm at 1247 Ocean Drive, apartment 4B. No pressure, no expectations. Just coffee, and someone who understands that sometimes the world feels too heavy to carry alone. D. I looked up, scanning the beach for the man who'd left the coffee, but he disappeared into the crowd of evening joggers and dog walkers. All I could see were strangers living their perfect lives, posting their perfect moments, completely unaware that someone was drowning in plain sight just 20 feet away. 1247 Ocean Drive. I knew the building, one of those Art Deco hotels that had been converted into condos, all pastel colors and geometric lines that screamed old Miami glamour. The kind of place where people with money went to reinvent themselves or hide from whatever they were running from. I sat there for another hour, watching the sun melt into the ocean and turning the piece of paper over in my hands. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to chalk this up to another Miami weirdo and continue wallowing in my misery alone. But another part of me, the part that had been so tired of being strong, of pretending everything was fine, of carrying the weight of other people's expectations, was desperately curious about someone who'd noticed my pain when everyone else had looked right through it. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside 1247 Ocean Drive at 7 p.m., clutching the note like a lifeline and second-guessing every decision that had led me to this moment. The building was even more beautiful up close, restored to its 1930s glory, all curves and neon and the kind of architectural confidence that Miami was famous for. I almost turned around 3 times before finally pressing the buzzer for 4B. Hello? The voice that came through the intercom was warm, slightly rough, like someone who'd spent years learning to speak carefully. This is going to sound crazy, but you left me coffee on the beach 2 days ago? With a note? There was a pause, long enough that I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then, 4th floor, elevators on your left. The apartment was stunning floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, minimalist furniture that looked expensive but comfortable, walls covered with black and white photographs that captured Miami in ways I'd never seen before. But what struck me most was how quiet it felt, like a sanctuary carved out of the chaos of the city below. "You came," he said, and I turned to see the man from the beach standing in the doorway to what looked like a kitchen. He was taller than I'd realized, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was silvering at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. Handsome in a way that suggested he'd been beautiful when he was younger, but had grown into something more interesting. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "This is either the nicest thing a stranger has ever done for me, or I'm about to be murdered." His laugh was unexpected, rich, and genuine. "No murder planned. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, wine, water that doesn't come with cryptic notes?" "Wine sounds perfect." He handed me a glass of red wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and settled into the chair across from me, careful to maintain distance while still making me feel welcome. "I'm David," he said, "David Chen. And before you ask, yes, I make a habit of approaching crying women on beaches. It's my calling in life." Despite everything, I smiled. "I'm Sophie Walsh, and thank you for the coffee, for the note, for this, whatever this is." This is two people who've had their lives explode in public trying to figure out if there's life after the explosion. "Your life exploded in public too?" David's expression grew serious, and he stared into his wine glass like it might hold answers. 3 years ago, my wife died in a car accident on our anniversary. We were supposed to be celebrating 15 years of marriage, and instead I was planning a funeral. The words hit me like a physical blow. "David, I'm so sorry." "Thank you. But the point is, I know what it looks like when someone is drowning in a crowd of people who can't see past their own lives to notice someone else's pain." "Is that what you saw on the beach?" "I saw a woman crying like her world had ended, surrounded by people taking vacation photos. I saw someone who looked like they needed to know they weren't completely invisible." Tears started forming in my eyes again. My fiancé cheated on me. With my best friend. 3 days before I flew here to clear my head before our wedding. Oh goodness! Oh goodness! I took a large sip of wine, grateful for the warmth that spread through my chest. 6 weeks of planning down the drain. 2 years of a relationship that apparently meant nothing. A best friend who isn't my best friend anymore. David leaned forward in his chair, his dark eyes intense. "Can I tell you something?" "What?" "Pain isn't a competition. What happened to you matters just as much as what happened to me. Betrayal cuts just as deep as loss, sometimes deeper because you have to live with the knowledge that someone you trusted chose to hurt you. People keep telling me I'm better off without him, that I dodged a bullet, that I should be grateful I found out before the wedding. And how does that make you feel? Like I'm not allowed to grieve something that was important to me even if it turned out to be built on lies. Grief doesn't follow logic, Sophie. You're allowed to mourn the future you thought you were going to have, even if that future was never real. What would you do if you were in my place? Tell me in the comments." I stared at him, this stranger who somehow understood exactly what I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate to anyone else. "How do you know all this?" "Because I spent 3 years learning that the only way through grief is to feel it completely, all of it. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, the part where you blame yourself even when it's not your fault." He set down his wine glass and looked at me directly. "And I learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to see their pain and not try to fix it or explain it away." "Is that what you're doing? Seeing my pain?" "I'm seeing you, all of you. The pain is just part of it." The way he said it made something flutter in my chest that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the way his eyes lingered on my face like I was worth studying. "Can I ask you something?" I said, emboldened by wine and the strange intimacy of sharing secrets with a stranger. "Anything." "Why did you help me? Really? You could have walked past, assumed someone else would handle it. Why did you care about some random crying girl on the beach?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the ocean view. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more vulnerable. "Because for 3 years, I've been that person crying in public while everyone else pretended not to notice. In hospitals, at the funeral, at the grocery store when her favorite song came on the radio. And I know how alone you feel when you're falling apart, and the world just keeps moving. But you're okay now?" "I'm learning to be okay." "There's a difference." He looked back at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I don't feel alone." "Because of me?" "Because of you." The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. I was 24 years old, fresh out of a relationship that had imploded spectacularly, sitting in the apartment of a man I'd met under the strangest circumstances imaginable. Everything about this situation should have felt wrong or dangerous or too complicated to navigate. Instead, it felt like the first right thing that had happened to me in months. "David," I said carefully, "I should probably tell you something." "What's that?" "I have no idea what I'm doing, with my life, with this situation, with anything. 3 days ago, I thought I had everything figured out, and now I'm in Miami drinking wine with a widower who rescued me from a public breakdown. And how does that feel? Terrifying. And wonderful. And like, maybe not having everything figured out isn't the worst thing in the world. His smile was slow, transformative. Sophie, can I tell you a secret? Yes. Nobody has anything figured out. We're all just making it up as we go along and hoping for the best. Even you, with your beautiful apartment and your wisdom about grief and your perfect coffee delivery timing? Especially me. Do you know how long I stood on that beach watching you cry before I worked up the courage to approach? 20 minutes. I bought that coffee, walked toward you, chickened out, walked away, came back, chickened out again. What finally made you do it? You look like someone worth taking a risk for. I set down my wine glass with trembling hands. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Is this, I gestured between us, is this just two broken people finding comfort in shared misery? Or is there something else happening here? What do you think is happening? I think I'm attracted to you in a way that probably isn't smart given my current emotional state and the fact that we met under completely bizarre circumstances. And I think you feel it too, but you're too much of a gentleman to say anything because you think I'm vulnerable and you don't want to take advantage. David leaned back in his chair, studying my face with an intensity that made heat creep up my neck. You're not wrong. About which part? All of it. So what do we do? I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair and I caught a glimpse of something that looked like frustration. Sophie, you're beautiful and intelligent and brave enough to knock on a stranger's door based on a note in a coffee cup. Under normal circumstances, I'd be trying to figure out how to ask you out without seeming presumptuous. But these aren't normal circumstances. You're rebounding from a major betrayal. I'm still figuring out how to be a person again after losing the love of my life. The age gap alone would be complicated enough without everything else. How much of an age gap? 18 years. That's not that much. Sophie. His voice carried a warning. It's enough. According to who? According to society, probably your parents, definitely people who would look at us and make assumptions about power dynamics and motivations. I thought about it, really thought about it. What if I don't care what other people think? You should care. Your judgment might be compromised right now by everything you're going through. Or maybe my judgment is clearer than it's been in years because I finally stopped trying to live up to other people's expectations. I leaned forward in my chair, meeting his gaze directly. David, I'm not asking you to marry me or solve all my problems or be my rebound relationship. I'm asking if you'd like to have dinner with me tomorrow night. Sophie. One dinner. Somewhere public, completely above board. If it's weird or uncomfortable or feels like a mistake, we chalk it up to temporary insanity brought on by beautiful Miami sunsets and really good wine. And if it doesn't feel like a mistake, then we figure out what comes next. Together. David was quiet for so long, I started to worry I'd misread the entire situation, that I'd mistaken kindness for attraction and completely embarrassed myself. There's something I need to tell you, he said finally. What? I haven't been on a date since my wife died. At all? At all. The idea of being with someone else, of letting someone into the life Anna and I built together, it felt like betrayal, like I was giving up on her memory. And now? Now I'm sitting here with you, and for the first time in 3 years, I can imagine a future that doesn't revolve around the past. He looked at me with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror, and that scares the heck out of me. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared, the kind that means something important is about to happen. I stood up, suddenly needing movement to process the emotions coursing through me. So, is that a yes to dinner? That's a yes to dinner. And probably a yes to whatever comes after dinner, assuming you don't come to your senses and realize this is completely insane. David? I walked to the window looking out at the ocean where this had all started. I've been sensible my entire life. I followed the rules, made safe choices, built a relationship with someone who seemed appropriate on paper. And you know where it got me? Where? Crying on a beach in a city I'd never been to, completely alone despite being engaged to someone for 2 years. I turned back to face him. Maybe it's time I tried being a little insane. His smile was brilliant, transformative. In that case, I know a place that makes the best stone crab in Miami. Assuming you're free tomorrow at 7? I'm free every night for the next 3 weeks. That's how long I booked the hotel for. 3 weeks of insanity. I think I can work with that. Have you ever met someone who changed your entire life in a single moment? Share your story in the comments. That night, David walked me back to my hotel on Ocean Drive, and we talked about everything except the obvious attraction simmering between us. Art, travel, the weird magic of Miami that made people do things they'd never consider in their real lives. When we reached the lobby of my hotel, he kissed my cheek with a restraint that made me want him even more. "Tomorrow," he said, and it sounded like a promise. Tomorrow, I agreed. The dinner was perfect, not because the food was amazing or the setting was romantic, but because David was the kind of person who listened like my words mattered, who asked questions that made me think about things I'd never considered, who made me laugh in ways I'd forgotten were possible. "What was your wife like?" I asked over dessert, the question that had been hovering between us all evening. "Anna was steady, reliable. She made me feel safe in a world that often felt chaotic." His expression grew thoughtful. "She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays and kept photo albums and always had Band-Aids in her purse." "You loved her very much." "I did. But Sophie, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "Sitting here with you, I'm remembering what it feels like to feel alive instead of just safe. And I think Anna would want that for me." 3 weeks in Miami turned into 6 months of visits back and forth between Chicago and Florida. 6 months turned into me taking a job transfer and moving into David's apartment. The apartment turned into a house we bought together in Coral Gables, with a garden Anna would have loved and space for the art studio David convinced me to set up. People still make comments sometimes about the age difference, about how quickly we moved, about whether I'm really over my ex-fiancé or if David is truly ready to love someone new. But sitting here in our kitchen, watching him make coffee with the same careful attention he brought to everything that mattered to him, I know we made the right choice. Sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst moments, and sometimes the person who sees you at your lowest is exactly the person who can help you find your highest. If stories like this inspire you, make sure you're subscribed. I share one real story every single day, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.